Monster Hunter Outlanders is finally out on Android and iOS, and this might be one of those releases that people have been watching really closely for quite a while. Not just because it carries a Monster Hunter name, but because it's trying to do something the series isn't really fully pulled off before, basically, which is to deliver a proper large-scale hunting experience on mobile without completely watering it down. And right from the start, you can tell that this isn't just another spin-off trying to cash in, it's sort of aiming higher than that. At least it looks that way. So first of all, the core idea stays pretty familiar. You take on hunts, track down monsters, fight them in real time, break parts, scatter materials, and use those to craft better gear so you can take on stronger threats. The loop is still the backbone of the game, and thankfully it hasn't been compromised. If anything, Outlanders is actually understanding that this loop is exactly why Monster Hunter works, and it actually leans into it instead of trying to replace it with something overly simplified or just a ton of gacha. Where things start to feel different, though, is the structure. This is a fully open world setup, not the segmented zones longtime players are used to. Areas flow into each other naturally, and that changed how hunts feel now. Where instead of selecting a mission and dropping into a contained environment, you're already out there, moving through the world, gathering, exploring, and then suddenly a monster encounter happens organically. That shift adds a pretty decent layer of immersion that actually works in this game's favor. It makes everything feel less like a checklist and more like a continuous experience. Combat, however, is always a big question with something like this, specifically on mobile. And overall, I gotta say it actually lands better than expected. Attacks still carry weight, positioning matters, and dodging at the right moments just as important as ever. The game doesn't turn fights into button mashing, and that's a huge win. On another hand, there's also a pretty clear emphasis on co-op play, with up to 4 players teaming up, and when everything lines up, coordinated attacks, breaking parts together, reacting to monster behavior, it all genuinely starts to feel close to the console experience. Not identical, of course, in a literal way, but close enough that it really earns its own respect. That being said, however, the mobile limitations do show. Touch controls are decent, but they're not perfect. In slower encounters, you adjust quickly and everything feels manageable, but when fights get a little intense, like fast monsters, heavy movements, effects all over the place, you can feel the lack of precision compared to a controller. It's not game-breaking, but it does create moments where you know the system is holding you back. Another major shift comes from how the game just handles the characters. Instead of being just your custom hunter this time, Outlanders introduces a roster of these distinct characters, which are having their own, of course, distinct abilities and the playstyles. This adds variety and gives players more ways to approach combat. But it also introduces a layer of gacha-style design. You can feel it in how the characters are presented and how progression is structured around them. For some players, of course, this is not going to be a big deal at all. For others, especially longtime Monster Hunter fans, it might feel like a sort of departure from what the series is actually built on. That is earning strength purely through gameplay rather than systems tied to luck and the pulse. In fact, progression overall sits in an interesting place. On one hand, it's pretty deep enough to keep you engaged, crafting, upgrading, building out your setup, it's all there and feels pretty polished too. On the other hand, the game clearly follows a live service model. There are daily systems, progression pacing, small nudges that remind you that this is designed to be played consistently over time. It's not overly aggressive, but it's present, and depending on how sensitive you are to that specific sort of design, it can either feel structured or slightly restrictive. The hunts themselves are probably another point worth talking about. They're pretty well designed for the most part, but they tend to be pretty shorter and more compact compared to mainline Monster Hunter titles. This is clearly intentional as the game is built for mobile sessions, but it does also change the overall feel. You won't always get those long, drawn-out battles where everything goes wrong and you barely survive after 20 minutes. Instead, fights are pretty quick, more focused and easy to fit into shorter play sessions. That makes the game more accessible, but it also means some of that classic intensity is just now reduced. Visually, the game does a lot to make up for it. Outlanders looks far better than most people would expect from a mobile game. The environment is so detailed, the monsters are well animated, and the overall presentation feels like a scaled down console experience rather than just a cheap limitation. When everything is working together, combat, effects, sound design, it can genuinely pull you in. Performance is a bit more inconsistent. On stronger devices, of course, the game runs pretty smooth for the most part. But during heavier moments, specifically in co-op or large fights, you can notice some dips. I'm not saying it's unplayable, but it is in need of some refinement. Given that the game just came out, this is likely an area that will improve over time, but right now it's part of the experience. Here's the thing, what really defines Monster Hunter Outlanders right now is how it balances two very different identities. On one side, you have the traditional Monster Hunter formula, the slow, scale-based method combat built around learning and improving. On the other side, you have modern mobile design, faster pacing, accessibility, systems built to keep players engaged daily, and the game doesn't fully commit to either side, instead it tries to sit in the middle. And that balance, its aiming is where both its strengths and weaknesses are coming from. When it works, it feels like a genuine evolution. You can jump in, complete a hunt, make progress, and log off without needing to dedicate hours at a time. That's something the series has struggled with in terms of accessibility, and Outlanders solves it in a way that makes sense for mobile. But at the same time, if you're looking for the full depth and intensity of the mainline games, you're going to be noticing the difference. All that being said, Monster Hunter Outlanders is not a perfect game, but it's far more ambitious than most mobile adaptations. It respects the core of what made Monster Hunter enjoyable while still adapting to a different platform and audience. The controls aren't flawless, the gacha elements may not appeal to everyone of course, and the hunt structure is clearly adjusted for much shorter sessions. But despite all of that, it also manages to deliver something that actually feels like Monster Hunter, not just a version of it. And we think that's the key takeaway here. This isn't just a mobile game wearing the Monster Hunter name, it's a real attempt to bring that experience into a new space without completely losing its identity. And whether it succeeds fully over time will depend on how it evolves, updates, the balance changes, how it handles monetization going forward. But as it stands right now, this is, without a doubt, easily one of the most convincing Monster Hunter experiences on Android and iOS. Not a replacement for the main series, but something that can stand alongside its own way. And we think for a game like this, that is already a pretty strong start. Thanks for watching, this is Mobo. Let me know your thoughts on Monster Hunter Outlanders down in the comments, and I'll get back to you when I can. Take care everybody.